Good afternoon, it's 1 o'clock, Monday the 4th of February 2013. Welcome to UK Column Live. Your host today, myself, Brian Gerrish and Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Well, what's been going on in the world? Quite a lot. One of the themes that we're going to continue to report on is not only fraud and corruption in government, but also the means by which our press and media are steadily being gagged. Before we go there, just a quick comment on the weather. It's very cold and grey in Plymouth, light southwesterly winds, risk of rain, possibly heavy rain, possibly snow, but we'll wait and see what comes. And also we'd like to give a warm welcome to our new viewers from South Africa. Thank you very much for getting in contact with us, and we're delighted that UK Column is now spreading further overseas. So we will be doing more on that South African connection in due course. Okay, well, let's have a look at the serious things happening in UK. And of course, if we lose the free press, we're in serious trouble. And the Daily Mail over the weekend came out with some pretty strong words in its editorial. So if we just have a look at this. This was a small section to the Daily Mail Saturday editorial, but very, very powerful. We condemn any payments to the police, but we can't help feeling that when thousands of burglars and sex attackers are escaping with only a caution, Mrs. Casburn's sentence for making improper contact with a journalist is disproportionate. This, of course, is referring to the lady detective's sentence for trying to sell stories about the phone hacking. And the paper goes on. Yes, the police must be held accountable, but there is a grave danger that such draconian sentences will deter any public officials from ever talking to the press again. And to reinforce the point, the Mail says, the result is that criminality and fraud in the public sector will flourish. It is difficult to avoid the conclusion that post-Leveson, the state is brutally crushing whistleblowers to prevent any of its members in future revealing the corruption that exists behind its increasingly closed doors. I don't think we could have put it better ourselves, but the Mail there thoroughly picking up on the fact that slowly but surely the cross-party political alliance is now destroying free press and media. So here's the lady that they're talking about, April Casburn, Detective Chief Inspector, 53 from Essex, who was convicted of misconduct in public office, something that we see MPs and senior civil servants doing on a daily basis, but she's given a 15-month sentence for it. So the warning there very clear from one of the British national papers that we are moving towards a dictatorship and full state of the press and media if we don't do something about it. And of course the warning is also there about this gentleman, Mr. Leveson. This actually is an article talking about the area of his North London home, which is full of houses which start at 5 million. So clearly Mr. Leveson is an extremely well-paid and wealthy man who is certainly not living amongst the reality that most of us have to face. But of course, when one of the neighbours attempts to build something that's not liked, not only at judges but also senior media people like Richard Madley and former banking boss Sir Victor Blank joining forces to complain. And this is again a Mail article, and it points out that Sir Victor was the former Lloyd's chairman, heavily criticised in the credit crunch for pushing through the disastrous takeover of Ailing Halifax Bank of Scotland in 2008. But here he is, rubbing shoulders with TV stars and Leveson. And we're just going to remind you that, of course, Leveson, in his report, was in a tangled web of people, largely linked by Sir David Bell's Media Standards Trust and Common Purpose, but of course also linked into other senior police officers such as Cressida Dick, herself a senior Common Purpose graduate. You can trust the UK column because we were onto this story well before it broke into the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, the Times, and a little bit in the Guardian and the Sun. We are still pointing out the danger of Leveson's efforts behind the scene to gag the press.
Well, in fact, we seem to be the only people still talking about it because the mainstream press seems to have stopped.
Very quiet. It's very interesting. Has there been a D-notice put in place to stop the press talking about the Common Purpose Media Standard Trust links? Well, of course, under D-notice rules, the press and media wouldn't be allowed to say so. So we're going to say that as free media, we are still highly suspicious that at the moment other press and media are being gagged over the whole Leveson affair. But if an emerging police state is the reality, of course the Tories want to distract us, and tomorrow we've got a vote on gay marriage. And the key point of this article in the Week First Post is that some very nasty stuff is starting to happen in the background, where two Conservative journalists are threatening to out Tories who are secretly gay if they fail to vote the right way in Parliament. So this is rather more than a debate about gay marriage. This is getting extremely dirty.
That sounds like blackmail to me.
Almost, well, it is blackmail, isn't it? If you don't vote as we want, we're going to out you in the press. And the UK column feels that aside from the fact that this is not the most important subject in the country while we have a police state coming into position, that we're now starting to see how exceptionally dirty and devious some of the gay networks in Westminster are. Extremist, I think is the right expression. So we'll leave you to think about that one. Of course, in the background, we've also got reports about the Elm Guest House, where amongst others we had senior Tories meeting to indulge in sex with male prostitutes. But of course, what's emerging more and more into the press is that youngsters were also involved in this. And the Independent here is highlighting that victims are coming forward who are talking about young victims being taken overseas, including to Amsterdam. So we wait to see at the moment whether the police are really going to do their job and get in amongst the paedophile rings, which have clearly been operating at extremely high level within Westminster and further afield into the elites. But there's obviously a lot more to that story than we're being told at the moment.
Yeah.
What have you got for us?
Right. On Friday, Saturday and Sunday, there was a security conference in Munich. More than 400 global foreign and defence policy people discussing global hotspot issues, including the situation in Mali, Syria, Iran's nuclear program, no doubt North Korea as well. And that was the 49th Munich Security Conference. So that was Friday, Saturday and Sunday. As this article here from a German newspaper points out, diplomats in despair over Syria's civil war. Top diplomats could agree on one point. There's little chance that the conflict will end at any time soon. But I wanted to highlight this gentleman, Kenneth Roth from Human Rights Watch, because he really was saying, the blame from the conference floor, not just from Roth but from others, was that Russia was pretty much to blame for what was going on in Syria at the moment, in the sense that if Russia had simply just capitulated with the Security Council from the beginning, then the whole thing would be done and dusted by now. No doubt Assad would be dead and the problem would have gone away. But Roth in particular, director of Human Rights Watch, said that if Russia uses its veto again in the Security Council, then that body should be bypassed. And that the West should just proceed ahead without so much as a by your leave from any other international opinions. Of course, naturally enough, Senator McCain, who was also there, typically came off with something even more ridiculous, which was that the nuclear Patriot missiles, which are in Turkey at the moment, should be changed from a defensive position to just basically shooting down any Syrian aircraft that fly. But you know, in general, the situation is that the chessboard seems to have been kicked over globally. We're now, according to Tony Blair, in a fight with Al-Qaeda, which will last at least a generation. He has likened the battle against Al-Qaeda to similar to the battle against communism. He's comparing it to the Cold War, basically. You know, well, where does he get off even getting involved in this conversation?
Well, I think the key question with Tony Blair is who is backing him, because this man is a created person, he's a created politician. He was pushed through the British political system, and now he's on the world stage. Okay, he's making millions for himself, but of course this is with friends and people in high places, isn't it? So the question is, who is really backing him apart from JP Morgan?
Well, this photograph here was from the Andrew Marr show on Sunday, and the hypocrisy of the things he was saying, just staggering once again. You know, he's serial hypocrite, really, but he's saying if you don't intervene and just let things happen, it's going to be long, difficult and messy, and probably a lot worse. It's a very difficult decision. I don't think he ever found a decision to kill people difficult, personally. But the key point is, of course, that he's going around stirring up these problems along with others in the establishment, and then he's coming around and saying that, you know, once the problems exist, we've got to intervene. Well, he started it.
Well, and of course, he's not going to put himself in the front line. We can be sure that Mr. Blair won't have his personage in the way of any bullets or explosions or death or carnage. Simply, let's help stir it up. And it's very interesting, isn't it? These hand movements of Mr. Blair, I don't know, they're just not normal to me, whatever's going on there. Something extremely strange. But he's not only talking about Al-Qaeda now, because of course he's advisor for both sides of the political spectrum. So Tony Blair is boasting at the moment that he's not only supporting 90% of what Cameron's doing with regard to Europe, but he's also broadly in support, and he's also in the background supposedly helping and advising Ed Miliband, putting a bit of pressure on him at the moment, because Tony Blair seems to be saying that Ed Miliband is not moving forward with the creation of one nation. By that they mean one nation with big society control, dictatorship. So Tony Blair is advising the Miliband brothers from their, of course, Marxist background. That's where they come from. But Tony Blair is also advising Cameron. So we must be able to say now that the Tory Conservative Lib Dem politics is now a complete sham. It's been exposed as a puppet show. What we've really got operating is one collaborative dictatorship.
But of course, Tony Blair's not just supporting so-called leaders in Britain. He's also got absolutely involved in Obama's re-election campaign. He's still advising Obama on various things. We know that he's also getting involved in Israel with his flat in Jerusalem. He gets involved in Israeli politics as well. So this man is clearly getting his fingers in just about every pie that he can. Yeah,
with big financial backing. We just take a look at Mr. Freudian slip there. Mr. Blair, just in case anybody's forgotten, have a look at the eyes to see the true intent of this man, and we haven't doctored that photograph at all. And just let's remember where he now puts himself in his sort of status in UK. Here's a picture of just one of the Blair residents.
He's just bought a new residence actually for his son over the weekend.
Number 7 or 11? I've lost track.
Yeah.
And this is another photograph, just so that we know what sort of man we're dealing with. And he is now advising Cameron. So if you're still out there supposedly as a true blue Tory, or a pink rinse Tory, I think it is now, whatever you are, if you think you're supporting the Conservative Party, what you're really getting is another dose of communitarianism, very close to communism, via Mr. Blair. More serious things afoot overseas.
Well, you know, it's just... Perhaps Mr. Blair has advised William Hague on this, but Hague is now saying that the door is open to Mali troop deployment. He's obviously concerned, he says, about the potential for mission creep.
Well, it's not mission creep, it's crept. It's already happened, isn't it?
Well, of course, he's saying that there are no combat troops at all in this deployment, and there are no plans to send combat troops at this moment in time.
So why is he worried about mission creep?
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So what more can you say?
But hypocrisy.
It's okay because we're sending nice little drones into Afghanistan. No doubt we'll be sending them into Mali in due course. But this is the Black Hornet Nano, which has been deployed in Afghanistan with British troops. It's Scandinavian designed, weighs about 16 grams, what's that, half an ounce, and about the size of a finch, so 4 inches long. Little helicopter with a tiny camera that relays still images and video to a remote terminal. So I guess they're using this to fly inside buildings. But it did remind me a lot of Minority Report, if you remember that film. Absolutely amazing.
So they're testing it out there, and in fact it's going to be used on populations. That's my prediction. This is where this is going.
This is where this is going, yes, absolutely, yeah. Okay, so a nice warning from CNN here. The US and US allies are warning North Korea against provocative moves, provocative in inverted commas. So this is a new Secretary of State in the United States, John Kerry, and his South Korean and Japanese counterparts have warned North Korea against any provocative moves ahead of a possible new nuclear bomb test by Pyongyang. Now, again, this is just another warning against a nation which refuses to get involved in the international financial system, not to even think about developing its own defense capability or its own technology. But I mean, we've got to keep North Korea's capability in perspective. The last test that North Korea did on a nuclear weapon was in 2006. It had a yield of 1 kiloton, and we've got to remember that Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. So North Korea is a far away from being in a position to be a genuine threat.
But there's a lot of rhetoric at the moment.
But there's a lot of rhetoric.
Get us focused on North Korea.
Yes.
So Russia today.
Right. So these are the people that we're supporting: kidnappers, terrorists. Our traitor William Hague is supporting these people, but apparently at least they've freed several hostages now, apparently including 2 Russians and Italian, in exchange for their fellow freedom fighters. So apparently a bunch of terrorists have been released, and some people that have been kidnapped have been released in return. But the person who has not yet been released is the Ukrainian journalist that we talked about before Christmas, who was under an imminent death threat. So far she has not been put to death, but she's also still not been released, and there's still a $50 million ransom on her head.
So this is a ransom which is being done under the name of William Hague, really, because he's supporting these people.
Well, exactly,
Or
yes,
have I got the wrong picture here?
Well, William Hague, and in fact, you could argue, because we are still not actually demanding this man's head, that it's on our heads as well. So William Hague needs to go, I think, until, and in fact, everybody needs to go until such times as they're prepared to do the right thing in Syria and deal with these people.
Okay, well, more on what's happening in UK, and this is a quite incredible story which has come out in the Star, and this is about a supposedly a blunder over council tax in Sheffield, but the story is utterly incredible. Basically, 5,000 summonses were issued accusing people of not paying their council tax. And when people receive these, it said that if you don't turn up at court, the judgment will go against you. And the whole point of this story is that the summonses were issued to people who weren't in arrears, were paying, had paid, but it ended up with thousands of people trying to turn up at court. And let's just have a look at a bit of the text of this. Hundreds of worried residents descended on a Sheffield court yesterday after the council issued 5,000 summonses accusing people of not paying council tax. Tempers were frayed as men and women of all ages Pregnant mums with pushchairs and students queued for hours in the cramped magistrates' court basement. The wait was so long that officials handed out numbered raffle tickets to marshal the crowds. Each resident had received the same letter dated 11th January, but most of which arrived only yesterday or Thursday, alleging non-payment of council tax. It ordered recipients to appear at court yesterday afternoon and threatened, if you do not, you will be proceeded against as if you had. Now, this is pretty hardline rhetoric, but what's very, very interesting about this case is that the summons were not handed out by Sheffield City Council. They were in fact handed out by this company, Capita. We contacted Capita earlier this morning and asked them to give us a statement for this news programme today. Either they weren't prepared to or they didn't come back to us in time, but either way we haven't got a response from them. But essentially here we've got a classic case of public services being put in the hands of totally unaccountable private companies, massive company, Capita, and it would appear that this private company thinks it can issue summonses. Now, if anybody is feeling this just can't be right, we know for a fact that in Plymouth, the local council itself has been issuing summons as if it was a magistrate's court in its own right, and we know that councils are hiring courts in order to conduct their business of intimidating people to get them to pay. If we go on to Sheffield City Council's website, which we did, basically you very quickly under the council tax system find pages of threats, bullying, intimidation as to what will happen to you if you can't, don't or won't pay your council tax. But the key thing highlighted here is that Sheffield City Council is actually saying we will summons you. And of course we're now seeing the real evidence that we have a private company on contract to Sheffield who's doing the dirty work. Please go and look at this material yourself because we are now starting to see the true nature of what is really big society. This is the state absolutely crushing people who are part of the system. And remember that in this case the people weren't even in arrears. One mother said that they'd rung the council's telephone helpline in the morning but were kept on hold for up to 40 minutes before being cut off. New mum Altine Boother King, aged 22, from Southey Green, said, I was astonished when I received my letter saying I owed £500 plus £100 charges. I paid my council tax last September. Sheffield have apologised and promised an urgent investigation, but some residents said they'd been frightened, and certainly we could imagine that. One said it's absolute chaos. They shouldn't be causing all these people this amount of stress. It's a very threatening letter. And actually there's statements from the public which go on and on. Do go and visit the website. I'll just pull up these pages. This is how much information Sheffield has put up, which is essentially threatening people if they don't do the right thing. Yeah, so read it yourself. But basically the Conservative government is now basically handing control over to totally unaccountable private companies. Beware.
So 2 points there. We know that councils have been issuing summonses for quite some time now. That is an unlawful act.
Yes, indeed. Yep.
It's even doubly unlawful then to outsource that to a private company.
Well, it's fraud, surely.
Absolutely. Yep. And the other point, let's just remind ourselves again that this is part of government. Just it's local government, not national government. It's still part of government, still part of a government which is supporting terrorists, and therefore paying our tax to that regime is unlawful under the Terrorism Act 2000.
And I think I'm right in saying it's Capita that's also the front end of the BBC. So now when you make a complaint to the BBC and you think you're talking to the BBC, you're talking to Capita. Capita, I also think, has originally, whether they still do, I don't know, but has originally held board meetings in Deutsche Bank. So who's really in control of this company and what's their objective? I think we need to be quite inquisitive about. So Mr. Redwood hasn't appeared in the news for a while.
Yeah, John Deadwood has now appeared in the Telegraph writing a blog post, I suppose you could call it.
This is an ex-Rothschild man, if I remember correctly.
Absolutely, yes. He's chairman of apparently he is now chairman of the investment committee of wealth manager Evercore. I'm sure that isn't Rothschild linked, but who knows? And he's really talking nonsense here about the prospects for bonds in the stock market. And he's saying that after 5 years of recession, broken banks and crisis, the UK stock market heads for new high ground. And of course, everybody must have noticed that the stock market is back above the levels it was at in 2007, just before the crash. He says, markets are not powerful individuals expressing a single well-researched opinion of how profits and the economy are going to move. They're the results of the views and actions of thousands of people from all over the world buying and selling securities for a wide variety of reasons. And of course, that's no longer true. That might have been true when he was working for Rothschild, but not really anymore, because most of the transactions that happen on the stock market these days are as a result of hedge funds and systematic computer-based traders. There aren't too many. The quantity of transactions happening as a result of individual human decisions is relatively few now. But he goes on to say, and it's really the whole point of this article is it's another example of somebody coming out and saying that the worst is over. So he says, are we over the credit crisis? It does look as if the worst is past, with countries recovering at different rates depending on how severe their initial problems were and how quickly they reacted. However, the euro crisis may be temporarily calm rather than resolved, as they are still trying to find a way of promoting growth in heavily indebted countries. And he says in the article that investors, who ran the government bonds because of the 2007-2008 crash, are getting back out of bonds and back into equities, and suckers really. So nothing has changed. Economy no better than it was, and anybody investing in the stock market really is throwing good money after bad.
Yeah.
But George Osborne then, of course, is making a speech, or he may already have made the speech by now today, about the banks, and this really comes to the bottom of where Mr. Redwood is wrong, because he's calling for the banks to be reset, according to the Telegraph and according to the Mail. He's saying that next time that he'll allow banks to go to the wall next time rather than taxpayers bailing them out. I don't believe that for a second. But his speech, according to the text of the speech, did have a couple of interesting points. He says part of having a successful financial services industry is having successful British banks who want to lend at home and compete around the world. Think of some of the most important moments in your life: when you bought your own home with a mortgage, when you took the plunge and started your own business. Then he goes on to say, when you had a fire at home or your possessions were stolen. It's just very strange, very strange. So he talks about the anger that people felt with regard to what happened with the banks. I understand that anger, he says. I feel it too. But anger can be negative, destructive thing if it is not channeled into change for the good. Right.
Yes, so it's the change. It's always the change agenda, which is the destabilising of the country, which is what they're really talking about.
Right. So what's the change that he's talking about? So first of all, the first change is we've got a brand new watchdog with new powers to keep banks safe so they don't bring down the economy. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about that the Financial Services Authority has disappeared, or will do in the summer, and that their role will be served by the Bank of England. Whoopie-doo. Second, we've got a new law to separate the branch on the high street from the dealing floor in the city to protect taxpayers where mistakes are made. And of course, this is kind of a fraud because it's not really separation, it's ring fencing. So the banks won't actually be separated at all. Third, we're going to start with the industry, changing the whole culture and ethics of the business so that they work for you, us. Right, okay. Fourth, we're going to give customers the most powerful weapon of all, choice. Now, what he's talking about here is the ability of customers to switch, just like they do with utilities, and we can see from the utilities
Chaos.
what an effect that is having. When you're operating as a cartel, just as the utilities are, it doesn't really matter who you switch to. You're going to get the same service with the same sort of charges involved. And then he goes on finally to say, and my message to the banks is clear: if a bank flouts the rules, the regulator and the Treasury will have the power to break it up altogether, full separation, not just a ring fence.
And nobody prosecuted, nobody put in prison. You just break them up. You've been bad boys, we're just going to break the banks up.
Well, let's understand exactly what he's saying here. If a bank flouts the rules, right, what he's actually saying is if you get caught, right, he's not saying the rules will be imposed stringently. He's saying the rules are there, but find your way around them. That's what ring fencing means. You'll have these regulations in place. Find your way around them, but if you get caught, you may suffer full separation. So, well, we'll see.
And the idea that George Osborne is telling the banks anything, I find laughable, because quite clearly he is a puppet of the banks. The subject which I might drop in there is that we're getting quite a lot of correspondence at the moment about positive money. Certainly one of the spokespeople for Positive Money seems to be indicating that they have huge trust in the Bank of England, which I don't think we would support. But we'll come on to that at a later date.
Well, I wrote about this
Indeed.
on the website quite some time ago, and that was one of the key points I was making about them. So, yeah.
And what is it? RBS?
Yes, so perhaps RBS will be the first bank that gets broken up then. So they're expected to face criminal charges and a £500 million fine for their role in the LIBOR rate rigging scandal. Now, of course, 81% state-owned. So, in fact, we'll be paying ourselves this £500 million, and it just does seem like a bit pointless. Really, this isn't going to deal with anything. The bank isn't going to suffer too much from this. So, and Osborne is not dealing with the real economy. So here we've got the Mail telling us that the price of rice has soared by 80% in the last year. It is not just rice; it's every basic essential of life, really. All commodities are suffering extreme inflation. We're not saying that in the inflation figures because they're fiddling the figures basically with their basket of goods and with the way that goods are being packaged. And the quality of goods is being sucked out of the quality is being sucked out of goods, and that's one of the reasons why prices appear to be staying static in some areas. But certainly with commodities are going through the roof. Have a read at that article. Just another example of the extreme inflation we're seeing in certain areas.
Yeah, we've got the overall cost of living for British families as well.
Now, of course, this isn't really inflation related. This is more to do with the tax burden. £2,000 cost of being British. We actually pay extra compared to other countries. 18% more to live in the UK than in the United States. High property prices are partly to blame. Fuel prices also to blame. So this is a report from the Centre for Economics and Business Research, basically saying that the government could do something to sort this problem out if they chose to do so.
Right. And I think you've got something on Mr. Fox here, one of my favourites.
So just remind me again why he left the cabinet. Was it fraud?
Well, most people would say so. Basically, fraud and security breaches where people who weren't security cleared were having meetings as if they were, which would have put quite a few military people in prison or out of their jobs. But Mr. Fox simply stands down with an accolade of you've done a good job from Mr. Cameron, and now he's going to be brought back into a position of power, which is exactly the same as Mr. Laws, having fiddled £50,000 of rent money, is now creating Mr. Clegg's manifesto.
Well, what I find quite interesting about this story is I think it's a direct reaction to the one that we featured on Friday with regard to the British Obama. I can't remember his name, but there was some impression in that article that Fox was actually the man driving the leadership challenge.
Yep, behind the coup.
But now we've got a story saying that he may return to the cabinet to help stop plots against Cameron. So, so the question that I would like to ask is he being brought back into the cabinet as a reward for staying quiet and not really pushing pushing the coup too much? Could that be what's going on?
It could be, but I think it's simpler than that. I think that basically what's happening is that as people are starting to really see what's going on with these people, we're seeing the lies, the fraud, the corruption, the collaboration between the parties. As the pressure of the public exposure, the public gaze gets stronger, they have to bring in more of the people they can really trust in order to keep this scam going.
Yeah.
And of course the people they're going to trust are people who've been caught with their fingers in the pie, in the till, in whatever they put their fingers in. They want people who've got tarnished backgrounds because that's how they're kept under control.
Yeah.
And we seem to have another one popping up here, Mr. Hune.
Ah, right. So, well, this is just a short thing, really, saying that he has in fact pled guilty to in his speeding points case, and of course, just simple speeding charge. In fact, it was perversion of the course of justice that he's pled guilty to. This is over the whole fraud of him handing his speeding points to his wife. Hopefully, Mr. Hune will be spending some time in prison.
Well, hopefully it will be 15 months in order to achieve some balance with the police lady who was put in prison for 15 months for making that phone call. And probably this is going to be a barometer to actually tell us what's going on. But my prediction is that we'll see Mr. Hune with some form of slap on the wrist because he's a member of the elite government, a corrupt government.
Indeed.
So talking of food shortages, we probably should just have a little look at this gentleman, Eric Pickles. He's been laughing at criticism and jibes from the public about his weight. He said he's not bothered about his weight at all. Clearly he is a heavyweight, but we were more interested in what he had to say in one of the interviews, and here it is. Right now, while he's juggling with a £6 million fund to teach immigrants English, it's a language that unites us, and Britain's 120,000 troubled families who somehow cause £9 billion a year in damage. So here's the attack. It's families who are doing damage. And this is his quote: "We're not trying to feel their pain. We're trying to get their kids back into school to get them off the sofa of despair and on the road towards a job." So note, the first thing is there's no question that the Tory party is trying to understand how people have got in this mess, and it's pretty clear it's been collaboration with the Labour Party. But we just want to get the kids into school where we can get the propaganda into their heads, and then we want to get the parents off the sofa and working presumably for minimum wage. Well, I'm sure that Mr. Pickles is going to continue to think about the problems he's got and have the odd cream bun while he's doing it. This is a particularly nasty little story that you discovered, Mike.
Very Day of the Jackal, in a sense, but undercover police officers working for the Met were using the identities of dead children that died in infancy or early childhood. They were issued with fake passports in their names in order to infiltrate protest groups. This was the area that the Scotsman article is talking about here was 1968 to 1994. I'm quite sure that this was still going on right up to the present. And the Metropolitan Police authorised the practice for covert officers infiltrating protest groups without consulting or informing the children's parents. Last night, Scotland Yard said the practice is not currently authorised. Okay, whatever they say.
Yeah.
I mean, what can you say about it? It seems like a pretty cynical thing to be doing, but of course it has been, as I mentioned, Day of the Jackal. It's kind of out there in the public mind that this sort of thing does happen.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the programme today. It's becoming increasingly clear that what is underway in Britain today is a dictatorship. It's not only dangerous for us living in UK, but of course we're seeing wherever it is, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in North Africa, in Syria, in Libya, we've got the hand of this corrupt British government helping to stir up trouble. So on behalf of the UK Column Live team, we'll apologise for the behaviour of our government. If we're going to do something about it, it's up to all the good people out there. Start speaking, start talking to your neighbours and friends about what's really happening, and start also saying, not in our name.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Thank you.